Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibilityman. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. My guest today is Lan Phan. She is a personal and professional development coach. Her work emphasizes purpose, developing a growth mentality, servant leadership, and so forth. Her writings on leadership have appeared in major magazines such as the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Money. Her new book is entitled Do This Daily: Secrets to Finding Success, Happiness, and Purpose in Work and Life. Lan has spoken before audiences, including the United Nations, New York University School of Law, and Bank of America. Lan Phan, welcome to the show today.
Hey, Stephen, so excited to be here.
Hey, I'm looking forward to our conversation today. But first, a reminder to our listeners and our viewers, follow, like, and share this podcast wherever you find it. Your support matters and is appreciated. It really helps me to attract people like my guest, Lan Phan, today. Hey, Lan, I've introduced you, but I'm curious about your background before you began doing the things that you do today.
So going way back, like growing up?
Well, wherever you want to pick it up. Yeah. So
Okay.
what was your career before this career? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I've been a serial, what I call entrepreneur. So I go into companies and I build up startups within them. So it's basically an entrepreneur, but using other people's money.
I love that. That's the
And
way
it's
to go.
much easier to use other people's money than your own.
Mhm. Okay, that sounds
Yes.
exciting. So what made did you make a shift to, your personal development coach, a professional development coach? You're
Yes.
speaking to all of these wonderful places. This shift, how did you shift from what you were doing to what you do
So
now?
it was really a forced shift. So I was a serial executive within various companies, working with big brands as well. So I was really on the C-suite track. And my last before starting Community of Seven was at Fortune magazine. So Alan Murray, who's the CEO, recruited me to start or create a startup within Fortune from nuts to bolts within 6 months. So I was given a multi-million-dollar budget and was expected to hire a team of 100 and build out this startup within Fortune. The pandemic happened and I got laid off, and I was told that I was supposed to lay off my entire team. And at that point, there was 5 of us. I'd hired 5 employees. Some of them had left jobs a week prior. So needless to say, I had just lost my job, and I realized that a lot of my identity was tied to my position and, the company I worked for. And I fell into this deep depression. And granted, it was deep into the pandemic. My husband had also been laid off because of the pandemic. And all of these thoughts of what am I going to do? How am I going to pay the mortgage? I was also supporting my mother, who's 87 now, who has advanced dementia. And it was just, I leaned into my fears and I leaned into my depression. And it was really the voice of my daughter, Morgan, just whispering in my ear, "Mommy, I love you, even without a job." That woke me up from this stupor. And I realized that I was playing the victim role. And it was at this period, too, where I really had to figure out what my purpose was, what mattered most to me. And I realized that even at the age of 45, 46 at that time, I had no clue. And so it started this period of self-reflection where I started to ask those important questions. What matters most to me? Why? And am I actually living these values as my core value? And so that was kind of the impetus for me to kind of start. I created these 4 pillars that really helped me transform and change my life and move me towards closer to finding out my reason of being why I was put on this earth. And so I started Community of Seven. When I first started it, it was based off of there was 5 of the employees. I basically said, we're going to meet weekly, and I'm either going to help you find your next job, or I am going to build my business and hire you back. And so there was 5 of them, me, and my daughter Morgan would sometimes join our Zoom calls. This is the height of the pandemic, and there was no school. And so that was the origins of Community of 7. And I always tell businesses, the other reason is that 7 is the ideal number for any type of meeting. When you go beyond 7, a meeting loses its productivity by 10%. So that's what I tell businesses, what Community of 7 means. But there's also, my faith is something that's very important to me. So 7 is the divine number, the number of completion, etc. So there's levels to why Community of 7 is called Community of 7. Long story short, I started building out Community of 7, and the first iteration of my company was really focused on building these masterminds with executives. Executives like Rodney William, who's the president of Diageo Canada, and all of these other senior executives that were kind of in my network. And we went through these 4 concepts of, that I talk about in my book, Do This Daily, right here. The first one really being what matters most. Number 2 being your mindset creates your destiny. Number 3, change requires consistency. And number 4, change requires changing who we are. And so that was the genesis of me starting Community of 7. And then after a year of real success in building these masterminds, I realized that I wanted to help more people. And so I started doing these free micro learnings and Let's Talks. I launched a YouTube channel, and then I started writing this book because I realized that I didn't want to just help people who are already successful. I wanted to help people who were like me 5-10 years ago, trying to figure it out.
Yeah, well, look, you've given us a lot there, so I got to unpack some of that.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I like about you, and you gave another example of it today, is that you are transparent about certain things in your life. And you just mentioned, once later fired from your job, you felt depression. So my question really is, how did you come to being able to express something like that publicly? I mean, was this difficult for you to just speak up on that subject?
Yes. No, it's not now. It was probably 5-10 years ago. I think in the past, I strove so much for perfection, and I had to be this perfect leader. And I realized there was a realization that I will never be a perfect leader because no one is perfect, right? And I think a big aha for me is I lived a lot of my life in shame because I grew up as a Vietnamese refugee. We grew up in poverty, grew up in Inglewood, California, didn't have much. My mother supported us, our family of 5, on an income of no more than $15,000 a year. And so when I got into Stanford University, I felt shame, like I don't belong here. All of the other students went to these private schools and went to Exeter. And what I've realized as I've gotten older is that when you shine a light on what you think your perceived weaknesses are, your flaws, your pains, it no longer has control over you.
Yeah.
But when you hide it in darkness, it grows and it festers and it takes over you. But when you shine a light on you, you're telling the world, this no longer has power over me, and I can talk about it. And one of the things I realized as a leader too late was that when I lead and I'm able to show my flaws and that I'm not perfect, it allows my team to do the same. So there's all of this talk of psychological safety, but if the leader cannot show that same amount of transparency and ability to admit their weaknesses and their failures, how do you expect the team to do the same?
Yeah, gotcha. You know, the first time, this is the first time I heard about depression with you, but the first time I heard you being transparent, was when you were talking about your hair. And I said, wow, how can I get in to talk about that? So do
Oh,
you
about my
recall
hair,
talking about your hair,
my
about the
gray hair.
changing the color of your hair? Yeah.
Oh,
Tell us about, I thought, wow, you were being very transparent. So tell us about that, your feelings around that as
oh
well.
yeah. So this is probably 2 years ago. I posted about growing out my gray hair, and so it was the middle of the pandemic, and I've been dying. I've had gray hair probably since my early 30s or so, and I've been dyeing my hair consistently. And during the pandemic, of course, you couldn't go to the beauty salon, but I think I decided at that point, and there's nothing wrong with people who do dye their hair. Let me put that as a disclaimer, but I realized I was tired of having to conform to these notions that women need to be ageless and that we can't grow older and that gray hair is something to be ashamed of. And so I started growing out my grays, and and now I'm very proud of it. And I don't, that doesn't mean I might not dye my hair in the future, but it was a small kind of symbolic statement that I think also coincided with where I was in my journey of like discovering who I am and no longer allowing society norms or what beauty or success looks like to influence my decisions.
Yeah.
And for me, and I think for some cultures and for some women, hair is very important, right? And
Mhm.
so for me, that act of growing my gray hair and being proud of it was kind of symbolic of just me saying I'm going to be authentically myself and not a version that you want from me.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. When I heard you say that, so yeah, it's great to embrace your authentic self. So that's fantastic. That caught my attention. I want to go back to the community of seven again. Is it still functioning? I mean, are you still the
Yeah, it's
CEO?
still functioning, but not the core membership, which were like the executives that I would meet with
Mm,
like once a month. They were like masterminds, and I would have half a dozen of these. And I have like a supporter membership, and
mm,
I'm still in the process of kind of creating more membership benefits for those core communities, but it's not the core part of my business. The core part of my business is really going into corporations and doing training and development. And I have like a
gotcha.
few year-long contracts. Some have been going on for 3-4 years, where I come in and I train. My specialization is mass training. So in the past, trainings would usually be someone would come in, there would be maybe 20, 30 in the room. And my goal is, how do you democratize training and development? Because in the past, like an executive coach, whatnot, would cost and upwards of $400, $500 an hour. And a contract for 6 months might be 40 to 60,000. So usually for companies, it's reserved for the finite few, the people who are
Mhm.
C-suite executives, VPs and up, etc. And my belief is that the way we transform corporate America is by giving as many people the opportunity to become leaders and to have the mindset of the leader. And
Yeah.
that's how we start transforming cultures of companies. Because usually it's
Mhm.
the people who are the loudest that kind of extends into the echelons of these companies. And that creates different dynamics within companies. And so I think my goal has always been to elevate the introverts, the empaths, the
Yeah.
of the world, because usually they're the ones that are a lot more quieter.
Right. And this brings me to my next question because it seems that you got a message for people who are be it professionals or just, general laborers who
Yeah,
are held back by their limiting beliefs. And I'm going to throw out a couple that I've heard you talk about and write about. One is the imposter syndrome. I mean,
yeah.
what do you say to individuals who feel, I mean, I've heard this from medical doctors, from everybody,
Yeah,
lawyers. What do you say to people who feel that somehow they are an imposter, even though they're well credentialed?
that everyone feels like an imposter. Meryl Streep has admitted that, one of the best, the most, revered actress of all times, the most talented actresses of all time, has felt imposter syndrome. And if Meryl Streep feels like she has imposter syndrome, you too can get comfortable with your imposter syndrome and feelings of you're not enough. The key is, and one of my favorite quotes is courage or courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And I think that's the same thing with imposter syndrome, doubt. We are going to doubt ourselves. We are going to doubt our capabilities. We are going to feel like we are not enough. The key is to still move forward. Take a small step forward. And I always think of Lao Tzu's quote, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And it's taking that one step and the next step and the next step after that. And I think sometimes we start doubting ourselves because we think about the journey that we have to take when your really only goal is to really focus on the first step. Because when you take that first step, the journey seems a lot more manageable, right? For someone who has never gone to college, right? And they might be in their 40s or their 50s. And they're like, well, I can't do that. I'm too old. Don't think about, I have to graduate in 4 years. Think about today, let me just go to an informational session. Then after that, I'm going to talk to a counselor. It's like you break down those different steps into where you want to be. And every day you kind of head closer and closer. Don't make it so big.
Yeah. That's great. I'm glad you said that. That everyone feels it. You know, if someone is saying that they never feel that way, they're probably lying. So
the people who do, so there was actually a study. There's actually a word for it, a psychological term for it, which is usually people who are the most incompetent are the most confident, whereas people who are competent sometimes are the least confident. It kind of goes with the adage of the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So someone can sometimes be very cocky and think that they're amazing at whatever they're doing. They're usually the ones that might have the bravado and all this other stuff. And it's that acknowledgement that the fact that you've identified that fear of not being good is an indicator that you probably have some type of competency in you.
Yeah,
right?
I love it. Okay.
One of the things I always say is that no one is born confident. No one. Confidence is a result of action by doing. So no one was born a master. They become the master by starting before they're ready and continually doing their craft every day until they become a master.
Yeah, you know, that's great. Okay, folks, we got that one. We've dealt with imposter. Don't worry about that one. Here's another one, Lan, that, look, you knocked my socks off with this one, because a lot of people are held back because of what they think others may think about them. But you did something on social media that blew that one up for me. Now, let's use a different word than the words you have.
Oh, so the SHIT word?
Yeah. So, So what do you say to someone who feels that, you know, I want to do it, but gosh, I'm just wondering what people are going to think about me. What's your message to that group of individuals?
I mean, the sooner you can, okay, two of the most I won't say confident, but if you look at people who, children when they're younger, the confidence is to the roof. I can be an astronaut. I can be LeBron James. There's no fear in these kids. It's only until they get older and then they get indoctrinated by people who are like, oh, you can't do that. You're not tall enough. You're not smart enough. You can't do that. And the other segment are really like people who are kind of later in their lives, the people who are, maybe in their 90s or their hundreds, and they've lived this amazing life. The commonality between those two is they don't care what other people think. They bask in their gloriness, right? It's funny. My husband is Jamaican, and one of their the sayings that my father-in-law used to say is, once a man, twice a child, right? And you kind of return to that innocence as you get older. And I think it's this notion of anything is possible. And we
Yeah.
start not believing in ourselves, having doubt because society tells us we can't. And my thing is the world, you're going to have enough people telling you you can't do something. Don't let it be you.
Mm.
Don't let it be
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And
Don't let that be your self-talk, huh? Yeah. Okay.
self-talk, yeah. And here's the thing. You're not going to be good at everything.
Mm.
I am 5'2". I will never be in the WNBA no matter how hard I train, right? But there's always going to be, I can be the best at what I can be doing what I do and figuring that out. And maybe I can't make there's this practice in Japanese culture, you have something called ikigai, and there's 4 concentric circles. One, this is kind of helps people find their reason for being. And the 4 concentric circles are what I love doing, what I'm good at, what the world needs, and what I can get paid for. And you're trying to find that middle part where everything connects. Because here's the thing, I might love singing, but no one's going to pay me to sing because I'm not that good. I'm not good enough for that, right? And your job is to try to figure out where all those things intersect, because you can't just chase passion and just go for your dreams. Because if my passion is something that I can't get paid for, I'm not going to be able to have a roof over my head. I'm not going to be able to support my family and do all these things because that's important to me as well. And I think our purpose in life is to figure out where those things can connect and then live our lives so that we can help others. But you
Yeah.
have to be intentional and you have to really curate your life. I always say that change is simple, but it's not easy. Because there's only really 2 ways to change your life. It's what you add in your life and what you take away. So the part where we take away is we chisel what we are not. So if I want to be, a high potential athlete, right? I have to chisel away all the bad habits. I can't be using drugs. I have to eat healthy. I have to do this. What are the things I need to add in? I need to add in regular exercise. I need to add in nutritious meals. It's about who I surround myself with. If I'm an elite athlete, I'm probably going to surround myself with other people who have that same vision of what they want to see in their lives.
Yeah.
So the art of becoming is not easy, but it's simple. What you add and what you take away.
I love it. That's great. And I think you also shared that you had an experience. This is not just theory for you. Didn't someone tell you that you could not write? You've written for all of these magazines. You've written your
Yeah.
new book. You're writing other things. Did someone once tell you that you could not write, or
Yes,
something
probably
like
a
that?
few. I've had previous bosses. Okay, I had posted about this. I've had bosses tell me to stay in my lane. Had bosses tell me I'm not a good writer. I've had bosses tell me to not speak in meetings with clients, that they'll do the speaking because I'm not a good speaker, or thank you for, creating that PowerPoint deck. I will present.
Yeah.
And I started, we have to kind of start unraveling the onion, because for the longest time I told myself I'm an introvert. I prefer being behind the scenes. And some of that is true, but you have to start really asking yourself, is that what you really believe, or is that because you started believing what other people told you you can or can't do? That's the hard part of, because there's nothing wrong with being an introvert and loving being behind the scenes. The part that's wrong is when you are not able to become your full self because you've let the world tell you that you can't. And so what today, to those people who said I couldn't write, I couldn't do this, I have my book coming out.
Yeah.
I write every day. I
Yeah.
starting writing on social as Community of 7 grew that to 250,000 followers. And then I
Wow.
started posting as myself as Lan Phan, and that's over 100 something thousand. Altogether, I have about 500,000 people who will say, and I'm not saying that I'm an amazing writer, but I write from my heart and I write to touch people. I don't write because I want to be the smartest person in the room.
Mhm.
I write because I want to be the most helpful person in the room.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And what's good here is that, this is not just theory that you've just shared. You've had people tell you, and then you had to not give a blimp about this
Yeah.
individual. I love it very much. Okay, so, we live in a very noisy world, a very busy world is where I'm going to express that. And a lot of people feel overwhelmed. And you speak to this subject as well. What do you say? What did you blog about? What do you write about? Your speeches about people who are just feeling just overwhelmed by life and by their profession.
The most important thing you can do is to pause and breathe. Pause, and we don't allow ourselves. Think about when you get a snarky email from your boss or a coworker, or you have something that happens to you that you're just full of fear. What's the first thing that happens? You stop breathing. And just right now, stop breathing for a second. Do you feel stressed in that sense?
I sure do.
So,
That's right.
back when we were being chased by saber-tooth tigers and we were fearing for our lives, we had to be quiet. We couldn't breathe. And that was your body telling you to be prepared to either, fight or flight. You're going to either fight or you're going to run away or pause and probably get eaten by the saber-tooth tiger. Um, and so the notion of breathing calms your body and it tells you that you're safe, right? I actually used to have a paper that said just breathe in my cubicle because I literally would forget to breathe. And I think what's powerful about our breath is that when we focus on our breath, we're not thinking about the past, we're not thinking about the future, we're thinking about the present moment.
Yeah.
And most of our stress and worries in life have to be ruminate about things that happened in the past, things we're ashamed of, fears, or things that might potentially happen in the future. And those are all mental constructs, they're not reality. And I think being in the present moment and pausing makes a difference. The other thing I would recommend for people who are feeling overwhelmed with everything is to break things down into smaller pieces, right?
Mhm.
You think about the adage, what's the best way to eat an elephant? One bite
Yeah.
at a time, right? What's the
Yeah.
best way to rebuild a mountain? One stone at a time. It's that same concept, right? And so don't look at everything that you need to have happen and the change that it requires. Just take things one small step at a time, and progressively it
Mhm.
gets easier and easier. That's how
Mhm.
transformation happens. And I think the issue with transformation is that people want it overnight, and that's not how
Mhm.
real change happens. It happens gradually.
Yeah.
And I think people have to get it out of their head that they need to be a certain place at a certain time, and
Right.
that the goal is to just be a little bit better every day.
I love it. I love it, Fan. So you mentioned something. I just have to stay with this just a little longer. You mentioned that some people are held back about their past, their stressful past. So have you thought about that and how people could actually realize that even though something might have happened back then, that it's not happening now and that they can go forward? Do you have any insights around that? How to break free from a stressful past that still bothers you?
Yes, I mean, I think for me, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, is this notion that to put light into what you once shamed you, right? To
Mm.
understand that things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you. And I think about this not Eckhart Tolle, sorry. Viktor Frankl. When I was
Mm-hmm.
a freshman at Stanford University, I took a psychology class that changed my life. We had to read Viktor Frankl's book, A Man's Search for Meaning. And for those that might not be familiar with Viktor, he was a survivor of the Holocaust camp, and he saw his entire family murdered by the Nazis. And when he came to the US, he started this branch of psychology called logotherapy, which is really kind of focuses on uh, people's search for meaning in their life. And what he observed in the concentration camps, Auschwitz, etc., and he wondered, why did some people die in these horrible environments? And why did some people survive? And what he found were the people who survived had something bigger than themselves.
Mm.
And a lot of times it was love, it was another person, it was something that they wanted to create or start that was outside of the horrors that were happening around them. And there was this line in his book that I remember rereading over and over again and highlighting, and it was this: in between the stimulus and your response is a space. In that space is the power of your response. In that space is your freedom. And your response impacts happiness and your growth. And so why that was so powerful was I realized that I wasn't a victim of my circumstances, growing up in poverty, seeing gang violence, doing all these other, all of these things that were happening to me growing up in Inglewood, California. I realized they were there to chisel me and make me stronger, and that I was not a victim of my circumstance. These were lessons that were propelling me forward, and I had power in my response. The response in terms of what I decided to do, my actions, but also what I thought in terms of how I interpreted those situations. So we can interpret those situations as being there to harm us, or we can see them as lessons to move us forward and propel us forward. And when we take ownership of those decisions, it empowers us. When we choose to take the victim role, we concede our power. And I think it's this whole notion of like, how do we kind of slowly build our lives? There are people that aren't going to believe in us. There are people that are going to tell us no because of our skin color, because of our gender, because of our abilities or not. We can choose to prove them wrong. And we could
I
choose to
love
take
it.
different paths.
I love it for sure. Okay, so I know someone who has the talent of a comedian. I mean, he's naturally good. In fact, when he laughs, I laugh because he's just that talented. And I suggested to him that he do something with that. And you know what he told me? Yeah, man, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of stage. So I know you've worked with people who have expressed their fears to you, and you've written about how to overcome fear. Could you give us some insights around that?
I mean, I think part of overcoming fear, and this is going to sound like, okay, you didn't answer this. Part of conquering your fear is to do what makes you afraid, and doing it every day until it no longer makes you afraid. Reframing things, right? So I'll give you an example. I used to be deathly afraid of public speaking. And so, the fear that you get in your body of like nervousness, and your body doesn't know the difference between excitement and anxiety and fear. For It's a two same thing. So before any speaking engagements in the beginning, I would just say, I'm so excited. Like I would literally say, I'm so excited to speak. I am so excited, even though that feeling wasn't really excitement. It was fear, right? And so part of it is just keep the more you do it, I'm no longer afraid of public speaking. I can speak. You could put me and say, hey, can you go speak to 1,000 people? And I would just go out and speak to 1,000 people. That fear has gone away because my hand has steadied. Think about surgeons. When they're first cutting into a body, I'm sure their hands are shaking. After a while, their hand gets steady, the more they do it. You have to do what makes you afraid until it no longer makes you afraid. And I know that sounds like, yeah, but I'm afraid to do it. Start small. For example, one of the things I started to do was volunteer to, when my daughter was in kindergarten, so this is 5 years ago, to read out loud to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, Lan, it's kindergarten. Shouldn't that be easy? Kindergarteners are the toughest crowds because if they are bored, they will literally go on the floor and sleep or just boo you, right? It's like the worst. You think comedy clubs are tough? Try reading to a kindergarten class. And it really made me practice because I realized to engage them, I had to be animated. I had to be, like not just read like Jack and Jill went up. I had to be like animated, get them excited, make faces, look at them, right? Those skill sets, speaking to a kindergarten class is the same thing that I need to engage you.
Yeah.
To engage anyone who's on the stage. And it's funny that you bring up stand-up comics. I actually study stand-up comics. I do public speaking in terms of keynotes. And I'll sometimes have to speak to 100, 1,000 people on stage. I don't study, I mean, I do study other speakers, but I really study stand-up comics because stand-up comics have to basically engage an entire audience with no visuals, no PowerPoints, just through stories and conversations and their facial expressions. You think of someone like a Chris Rock or fill in the blank. There's so many.
Yeah.
And the ones that are gifted, like Dave Chappelle, literally just standing there for 2, sometimes 3 hours telling stories.
Wow.
And that's what makes good speakers. But you don't get there from your first. The reason why a Dave Chappelle is a Dave Chappelle is he's been a comedian since he was like 13 or 14. And I will tell you, he is not who he was back then. You have to bomb a lot of shows. You need to get booed. You need to get heckled to be where you are today. So you can't expect to ride through the fear. The only way you can conquer the fear is by doing it daily until it becomes you. So
That's
yes,
great.
you're going to be afraid. Keep on doing it.
Now you mentioned once being afraid, but look, I know that you've spoken before the United Nations. What was that like for you? Coming from where you were like years ago to having that audience, what was it like?
I mean, it just becomes, I think what makes public speaking scary to people is that you start thinking, once again, what are they thinking about me? Right? And when you speak to someone you're very comfortable with, a friend or whatnot, there's no fear. It's just you're communicating your thoughts, ideas, and what you want to impact to that person. And it becomes natural. Same thing with public speaking. Speaking to one person can be scary or the same as speaking to 1,000 or 10,000.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right? You're communicating ideas. The difference is that story you tell in your head that, oh my gosh, there's 10,000 people, or oh my God, these are dignitaries and NGOs and CEOs from companies. These are the same people that you see. My daughter's in elementary and sometimes she plays soccer. These CEOs, these other people are parents in the stand, and the equalizers, we're both watching our kids fail miserably at playing soccer, whatever it is.
Right.
But people are just people at the end of the day, and they have their insecurities and their fears. And when you get out of your head that it's about you and it's about how you can help the people who you're talking to, then it changes everything.
Yeah, I love it. And, I want to get deeper into this. And while we're talking about one thing, you got to feel good about yourself and move forward. I want to look at this in terms of personal development now and see if I can elicit a response from you, because I know that you've either written about or spoken about the power of your interpretation. You know,
Yeah.
how you put it, I hadn't heard it this way before. And you said something to the effect, you know, you can feel miserable or you can feel strong, but it's your interpretation. Talk to us about that. If I got it right. If
Yes.
I didn't get it right, fix it for me.
No. So, I mean, here's the thing.
Uh-huh.
The average human, the National Science Foundation found that the average person has between 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Of those 12 to 60,000 thoughts, 80% are negative and 95% are repetitive.
Mm.
So we are literally, and here's the thing, we have a negativity bias because once again, back in when, our prehistoric times and our ancestors were trying to survive in the wild, they were running away from saber-toothed tigers and things that could kill them. And they needed to know the difference between a poison berry and one that was edible. And so we as humans are hardwired to have a negativity bias and to look for the negative. And so that was useful for us when we were in constant danger. However, today, the average person sits on, in front of their computers on a desk for 6.5 to 8 hours a day. The danger we are imposing is inactivity, right? The stresses we have are the snarky email from our boss, the deadlines that we have, and our body doesn't know the difference between that fear, that stress, and getting chased by a saber-toothed lion. And so we're slowly kind of killing ourselves, right? And so when we look at the fact that we have a negativity bias, it's our interpretation of things. Look at, riding a bike. When you first rode a bike, it was scary, right? Until it wasn't. When you learned how to ride a bike, when you get on a bike, you're no longer scared. So it's not the activity. Psychological studies have shown that in any situations, 20% is the actual what's happening to you. And 80% of the stress and anxiety is your interpretation of the event. So one person, skydiving could look at skydiving and just, that's my biggest fear. I will never do it. And their heart beats like this. And another person is like, that is so exciting. I can't wait. This is going to be amazing. The situation itself, parachuting, it's the same situation, but the interpretation is completely different. And that's for most things in life. For some people, public speaking is their biggest fear. It used to be my biggest fear. Now it's something I get excited about.
Wow.
So when you change your story, you change your mindset. The only way you can change your story, though, is you also have to get better at it every day and by doing the things that scare you daily until it becomes a part of you. That, once again, it's simple. It's not easy, right? And so when you think about our whole decision-making process, about 95% of our behaviors, our habits, and our subconscious beliefs. Everyone thinks that it's their thinking minds that decide what they're going to do. But 95% of the time, it's your subconscious. If you don't believe what I'm saying, right now, your heart beating. Are you telling your heart to beat? You're breathing. Are you telling yourself to breathe? There are literally millions of activities that happen, and our subconscious is the one that's kind of running the show. And our habits and our systems are part of that, right? But it's not our thinking mind that is in charge. It's our subconscious. The way we change our subconscious are what we do daily, our habits, our systems, etc., who we surround ourselves with. So you have to basically, to change your subconscious, you need to change your actions and what you do daily.
Yeah, I know there's a spiritual component of your work. I want to come back to this one.
Yeah.
if you have time, because there's a some spiritual component of what you do. Now, you also talk about confidence, and I've heard you say, and maybe I've read about something that you've written about it, that there's power in confidence, that there's a power of confidence. And then I wonder, well, what about a person who says to you, Lan, but I don't feel confident? You told me that there's power in confidence, but I'm not even confident. How do you lead them on a path to see their own power?
I mean, quite simply, no, confidence is not something that's innate. You gain confidence by doing. So it's that whole notion of taking that first step, and
Okay.
you gain confidence and mastery by doing. It's
Mhm.
by action and having that understanding,
Mhm.
right? And so there's no easy answer. I can't tell
Yeah,
you you're great, you're wonderful. You're not going to believe it.
yeah,
And you only start believing it when you gain mastery over something. And you only gain mastery by doing,
yeah,
right? If you wait for
yeah,
confidence, you're never going to start. And that's a
yeah.
problem, is most people are waiting to get confidence before they do, not understanding that you have to do to gain confidence.
Hmm. Okay, I love it. I love it. I just liked it when I don't know where I saw that, but you talked about the power of confidence. Whoa, that's pretty good. But look, I don't want to. We're getting close to the hour now, but I want you to talk because you said something pretty bold. You called it the four game changes, changing secrets to personal transformation. I said, whoa, wait a minute now. There are four game. What are those four? And maybe we've already touched upon them. If
Yeah.
you have, just enlarge upon them for me. Those your
So,
secrets, four of them. Yeah.
yes. So the four secrets, the first one is really about really being able to answer this question: what matters most to you?
Mhm.
Once you're able to answer that, it's really kind of creating those into your core values. This is what's important to me. And it seems simple enough, but most people don't pause long enough to ask those important questions. I always say I work with CEOs, and the first thing I ask them is, what brings you joy? And 95% of the time, there's silence.
Mhm.
And here's the thing: life is like a GPS. If you don't have an address, that GPS is worthless. It's not going to take you anywhere. And you might be able to get where you want to get to without the address, but you're probably going to have some detours. You're probably going to have some U-turns. You might fall off the cliff. When you in life, if you are intentional, if you know what matters most to you and what you value, you're more able to get there quicker, sooner, and purposely. So the first part is what matters most. The second part is your mindset creates your destiny. And this kind of
Mhm.
goes along with, I think about the Henry Ford quote. If you think, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And it's that belief system. Do you believe that you can? And even when you do have that doubt and that insecurity, that act of notion of having a bias to action and doing will start mitigating the doubts you might have in here in the head. And I think it's this notion of really focusing on having a growth mindset over a fixed mindset. And I look at the work of Carol Dweck from Stanford University. People with a fixed mindset believe that you're either born talented or skilled or you're not. Here's the thing: the people who have a growth mindset, I can get better with time, with study, with research, by working hard, are more successful because they don't quit when things get harder, because they know that they can get better. And
Mhm.
part of that is changing your mindset, because you might have been brought up thinking you're either born with it or not. Do you think
Mhm.
Kobe Bryant was Kobe Bryant, or any of these star athletes? They used to
Mhm.
suck when they were first started, but they got better over time, right? And they
Yeah.
developed the skill sets and the mindset. The third part is really about change requires consistency. We become what we do daily. And this is kind of where habits are important. And the fourth part is the art of becoming.
Mm.
And change requires changing who we are. So a lot of people want things, but they're not willing to change their lives. in order to get them. And I always, I talked about the whole, it's what you add and what you take out of your life. And when you think about the 4 areas that you need to change the most, it's really your systems, your habits, your environment, and your community. There was psychological studies that showed drug addicts would relapse when they went back to their home environment and their social networks. The ones that were most successful moved, or they leaned into a new social circle, maybe Alcoholics Anonymous, and they were more likely to succeed. Once again, we need to become the people that deserve the things that we aspire to be. If you want to be, wealthy, you have to think like that. You can't be doing the things that if you want to be healthy, if you want to be an elite athlete, you can't be eating unhealthy. You can't be living a lifestyle where you're using a lot of drugs and other things, right? We have to become the people we aspire to be. And that's part of changing who we are. But people want the outcome, but they don't want the things that you need to do to get there.
Right. Well, okay, folks, you got the 4 game-changing secrets to change your life. Look, we're almost out of time, but I got to ask you 2 more things.
Yeah.
Because as I said earlier, I just got the feeling that there's something spiritual in your work. And then I saw you write that it's possible to discover why you're on the planet. Wait a minute, Lan. How can someone discover that? Why were you made? Why are you here? How do you do that?
So faith has been something that's been very important to me since an early age. I lived in a unique environment where my mom was Buddhist and my dad was Catholic. So I think there's a difference between religion and your faith and your personal relationship with God. There's no right or wrong answers. I think it's individualistic. But I'm a firm believer that even if you don't believe in God or have a religion, that's fine. It's really, do you believe in something bigger than yourself? And I think the issue that I have with even American culture is that it's very individualistic. We just think about ourselves. And there's a deeper meaning to the world instead of just being the best, or, like if you think about what we watch on the news, we're celebrating the people who are the billionaires and the CEOs of these big companies, or how many social followings people have on Instagram or Facebook. But, if you harken back to the old times, it was like, how can I help those around me? How can I help my community? How can I make the world a better place than I found it? Leave the world a better place than I found it. And all of those different things really, there's an understanding that we are all interconnected. And that even though you might not look like me, we are connected in some ways, right? That we are brought together on this earth for a common cause. And I think there's so many division in the world right now, and that's because we focus on the individual and not the bigger purpose in the universe. And so, I can't imagine a life where I don't put God first. You don't have to call it God. For some people it's science or it's whatever, but you have to feel that there's something bigger than yourself, because otherwise, what is the purpose of our time here on this earth?
Okay, love it. Look, I got to ask you about this new hot book that's coming out soon. It's already out. It's already out.
Well, it's not. It's out on April 2nd, which is
okay.
4-year anniversary from when I got laid off at Fortune magazine.
Fantastic. Look, I love the title, Do This Daily.
Yeah.
Secrets to Finding Success, Happiness, and Purpose in Work and Life. Why did you write this book?
I really wrote this for my younger self. I wish I had learned these lessons when I was younger. But once again, I don't have any regrets, because I think I had to go through all of the hardships and experience all of these pains to get where I am now. But, I'm going to be 50 this year, and I've just figured out what I want to do when I grow up. Right. And the reason why is because I went through these 4 these really four pivotal secrets and experiences to really get me there. And so I want to help other people. What's the point of like, one of the things I say in Community of Seven when I pivoted, and really I spend 95% of my time on free content. And my goal is to train and elevate 1 million servant leaders, is that all of us are like raindrops. We seem small and inconsequential, but when we come together, that's how we change the world. It's like the ripples become waves, and that's how revolutions are started. And so, my goal is to just help as many people as I can while I'm here.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I'm glad you wrote that book. How did you come to this title? I mean, at what point did you know I have the right title?
It took a while. So, before this publisher that I have right now, Thin Leaf, I was working with this other company called Lioncrest. They ended up going under, but I was working with a few of their kind of editing team, and they also had a team that just did titles. And I had like probably 10 titles that I was working through, and then we kind of narrowed it down to this one.
Yeah, it works. It's a fabulous piece of advertisement. So when I saw it, I would like that book. Yeah, we couldn't just go past this title. Yeah. Is there any other, or are there any other nuggets that you want to drop on us before we say goodbye today?
I think the one thing is, wherever you are at, the hardest part has always been starting. Just take that first step. All of our insecurities and our fears are tied to that first step. But the funny thing is, once you take that first step, the next step gets easier, and the step after that gets easier. And that's what progress is. That's how transformation happens. It's continually taking those steps before we're ready, and to do it every day until it becomes part of us. So wherever you're at in life, imposter syndrome, you don't believe in yourself, you've been beaten down by the world, just get up and take that first step. And I think about the Japanese proverb, fall 7 times, get up 8 times. Doesn't matter how many times you've fallen, just keep on getting back up.
That's fantastic. I love it. Well, Lan, I truly appreciate you saying yes to my invitation. I got a lot out of this conversation with you today. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Great connecting with you.
Okay. Well, you've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Lan Phan. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Until next time, good day